In today's video, Minnesota welfare fraud scandal has officially entered a new phase. And this is the moment where Tim Walz, Ilhan Omar, and the Minnesota leaders are panicking because now this is a federal crackdown. And suddenly the entire circle of elected leadership tied to this scandal is in damage control mode. The same leaders who for years downplayed warnings, dismissed whistleblowers, and assured the public everything was under control. Now the tone has changed. Because when the president is stepping in and federal investigators are starting to follow the money, the question stopped being, did fraud happen? We already know the answer to that. The real question is, why did it take federal intervention for this to finally be taken seriously? And what does Tim Walz have to say now? You'll hear for yourself.
Under the nose of Ilhan Omar, Tim Walz, Attorney General Keith Ellison. We see a web of connections between them and those directly involved in the fraud. For example, Ilhan Omar alleged enabling introducing the 2020 Meals Act, which was ultimately subject to fraud. Held a campaign victory party at the Safari restaurant. That's where one of the men who run that restaurant has associations to the convicted individuals. And then there's Tim Walz. House oversight investigation role in his role as governor, or Keith Ellison, the attorney general. His job is to enforce the law in Minnesota, but instead he's getting donations after meeting with the Feeding Our Future representatives. The Feeding Our Future, the biggest known yet part of this entire theft ring. The executive director of Black Lives Matter, by the way, over in Oklahoma City, has now been charged with wire fraud and money laundering. The organization raised more than $5 million in 2020, but she is accused of pocketing more than half of that instead of using it to bail out people for protesting in support of BLM. No, she pocketed, allegedly, most of that money. Oh, by the way, here she is. You want to see a picture of her? Here she is. Notice who she's in the picture with. That's right. Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. But hey, it's just the system, right?
Listen, if you're someone who believes in coincidences, then maybe you can explain all of this away as just bad luck. But at some point, the evidence becomes too obvious to ignore. Is it a coincidence that Ilhan Omar was closely connected to the restaurant at the center of the Feeding Our Future fraud? It's a coincidence that Tim Walz, Ilhan Omar, and other Democrat leaders were rubbing shoulders, shaking hands, and appearing at events with people who are now being arrested and charged. And there's photos of this. And it's just a coincidence that this massive fraud effort came overwhelmingly from one community more than any other in Minnesota. You see where I'm going with all of this? Because one coincidence, maybe. Two coincidences, questionable. But when the same names and the same networks and the same faces keep showing up, that's no longer coincidence. That's a pattern. And now that this scandal has gone national, now that the federal investigators are involved, now that the spotlight is on Minnesota, suddenly Tim Walz says he's ready to clean up the fraud. Take a listen.
Any amount of fraud is too much. That's why over the last several years, we've made many systematic changes to state government to both detect fraud and hold those accountable after it happened. Year after year, we brought new ideas to the legislature to stay ahead of the evolving tactics, and they are evolving. AI poses immense challenges in the fraud space. We've sought top-to-bottom change in state government to create stronger oversight. We leveraged outside experts, we modernized technology, and hold criminals accountable. Here in this state and accepting responsibility and fixing problems, Minnesota is a great place to live. We rank at the very top of most states in quality of life. Affordability, we were recently named the 8th safest state in terms of crime. We were rated second most retirement-friendly state, which is simply amazing since Florida was 1, and we are still second on a day like today. And job opportunities. We understand the strength and prosperity of this state depends on the ability of every single Minnesotan to thrive. We are a state that chooses not to let people go hungry or homeless or uneducated. However, that generosity has been taken advantage of by an organized group of fraudsters and criminals. Minnesota's longstanding high standards of integrity of public funds go hand in hand with a culture of generosity. You can't have one without the other.
Tim Walz is talking like a leader who was completely clueless about what was going on, but that doesn't line up with the facts. There were whistleblowers bringing this information forward. There were warnings. There were red flags. And those warnings were ignored. And now he's saying this was carried out by an organized group of fraudsters. But here's the part he doesn't want to address. What about those fraudsters who donated to his campaign? What do you have to say about that? And to the other Democrat leaders in Minnesota also. That wasn't a problem then, was it? You were photographed. You were shaking hands with these people. And now you're claiming you have no idea who these individuals were? It was fine then, but now that the arrests are happening, now that the story's gone national, now that federal investigators are involved, now suddenly the governor wants to distance himself, it looks like. And as governor, Tim Walz owes the public an explanation for that, because what he's doing now looks less like leadership and more like performance. Fraud in my state? You don't say. I had no idea. Well, now that I know, I'm going to get right on that. I think it's fascinating how now all of a sudden we're seeing this level of concern. Now, here's the next question. Besides those donations, where else was this money spent? Who spent it? What was it spent on? And well, CBS dug right into that. Take a listen.
The Somali community in Minnesota has been in the news recently because of a massive federal fraud case and heated political rhetoric from President Trump.
Jonah Kaplan of CBS News Minnesota has an exclusive look now at how fraudsters spent hundreds of millions in taxpayer dollars.
A honeymoon in the Maldives, a fleet of luxury cars. Here's a box with more than $270,000 in cash. This was all evidence from a new trove of files obtained exclusively by CBS News, showing how a group of convicted Minnesota fraudsters spent taxpayer dollars. One text message reads, "You are going to be the richest 25-year-old.
We're not even at the end of the beginning of our pursuit of the stolen money and of the people who stole it."
U.S. Attorney Daniel Rosen leads the office digging into the wave of COVID-era fraud that hit Minnesota.
So how much money are we talking about stolen from the American taxpayer?
I can say with great comfort well in excess of $1 billion.
In the past 3 years, 87 defendants have been charged, 61 convicted. The majority of them are Somali American. Minnesota has the nation's largest Somali population. The perpetrators are accused of ripping off state-run programs intended to feed low-income kids, house the disabled, and provide services to autistic children.
This was a get-rich scheme.
Andy Luger was the U.S. attorney who first examined this fraud. He left in January.
One of the things we discovered is that a number of the people involved were buying investment property, resort property in Kenya.
Wire transfers reviewed by CBS News also show more than $1 million went to Chinese banks.
Luxury cars, private villas, expensive homes, overseas wire transfers. Listen, this wasn't some criminal mastermind operation. This wasn't Ocean's 11 plotted out. This was blatant, obvious fraud happening in plain sight. They weren't hiding it because they didn't think they had to. And that's the most damning part. These people always were going to get caught. It was only a matter of time. The only reason they didn't get caught sooner is because the people in charge weren't doing their jobs, either willfully looking the other way or operating with total incompetence. That's why it's hard to take Tim Walz seriously now. This happened right on his watch, and he ignored it. And now he wants the public to trust that he is the one who's going to fix it. That would be laughable if it weren't so serious, because when you add everything up, not just to feeding our future, but multiple programs, Minnesota is staring at an $8 billion fraud. But it's not just about Walz. Another judge in one of these liberal states has let another criminal walk free. Take a listen.
The Minnesota judge who tossed out a jury's guilty verdict in a fraud case is not the only judge in Hennepin County who had problems with the state's case. I broke this story that went national a couple weeks ago. Judge Sarah West acquitted Abdi Fattah Youssef 3 months after a jury found him guilty in a $7.2 million home health care fraud scheme. Since then, I've found that another judge, Amber Brennan, dismissed charges against Youssef's wife before it reached trial, and a third judge, Hillary Caligiuri, dismissed charges against another co-defendant. In that case, Caligiuri said the state had very little evidence. Judge West's ruling relies on a review standard for cases that rely heavily on circumstantial evidence with wording that is unique to Minnesota. It says that the evidence has to be inconsistent with any other reasonable hypothesis. I'm following a state Supreme Court decision expected to come back soon that could completely rewrite all of that. It's the conviction of Nick Firkus for the 2010 murder of his wife Heidi. Whether his conviction is overturned or affirmed, the court opinion will have a huge impact on many cases in the state. I'm Lou Bergoose. Follow for more news.
All right, so let's break this down. What he's basically saying is that because of the language of the law in Minnesota, a judge is able to let these people walk. And the people of Minnesota should be outraged by that. But this is exactly why the people who you elect and who represent you in the government matters. Laws don't enforce themselves, people do. And if the people of Minnesota don't like these outcomes, then they need to do something about the leadership and the laws that made this possible. This is also why the federal government needs to step in and has, because while someone might get off under a state judge due to weak status or loopholes, it's far less likely they'll walk away from federal charges. At least, I don't think so. It's not crazy to think about how this fraud got so out of hand. If you have a community that believes it has basically found a loophole in the system, and let's be honest, loopholes will always exist and people will always look for them, then yes, there are going to be individuals who try to take advantage of that. But here's how it always escalates. At first, it's one step, then another, and then because human nature kicks in, people start believing they'll never get caught, or that nobody's really paying attention, or that the system is too big, too sloppy, or too politically protected to stop them. And that's why this scandal exploded the way it did.
Well, I'm not comfortable with a hierarchy of races, and the president isn't either. But not all cultures are equal, and not all countries are equal. There are some people who come to this country to add value, and there are some that come to this country to take value. And when we've seen in Minneapolis that 50% of the people who were naturalized engaged in immigration fraud, and we're seeing the largest fraud in terms of welfare programs, perhaps in the history of our country, we know there's a problem. And the president speaks in language that Americans understand. He is blunt. He's not a politician, neither am I, and so I support as he is making people understand the threats that we're under right now.
Mass unchecked migration has created a stark socioeconomic disparity. Look at Minnesota. The percentage of Somalis on welfare assistance programs in that state far outpaces native-born Americans. Take a look at that. Leave that up on the screen for just one moment. If you wouldn't mind, put that back up. I want you to take a look at this. Blue, that is Somali immigrant households, 80% of which are on some form of welfare. But perhaps the most stark thing about that chart is take a look at the orange. That is Somali immigrant households who've been in the country for over 10 years. There's virtually no difference. 78%, despite having been in the country for over 10 years, on some form of welfare. But leaders in Minnesota were unable to grasp the idea of immigrant poverty. They were more afraid of being called racist if they did their jobs to try and deal with potential welfare fraud within the Somali community.
81% of Somali households in Minnesota receive some type of government welfare. I think it's safe to say they figured out the loopholes. But I want to share one more part of the story with you guys, because it's not just about the Somali immigrants in Minnesota. It's about the political leadership there too, because they're looking for their backdoor deals, their loopholes also. Here's Jeremiah Ellison, the son of Keith Ellison, the state attorney general. And, well, take a listen to this story.
This morning, Jeremiah Ellison was among the outgoing city council members to get an honorary resolution for their years of service.
So I give my gratitude to the North Side.
But one issue not mentioned, where he's been the final 5 months of his term. Harvard University as a Loeb Fellow. R.J. Coles first broke this story this summer, and it caught some off guard.
His Ward 5 constituents deserve a council member who shows up.
Ellison is splitting his time between here and Cambridge, Massachusetts. He's still earning his $110,000 city salary on top of a $57,000 stipend from Harvard. Now 5 Investigates has obtained these internal emails showing Ellison's office wanted more. They requested the Ward 5 budget to cover travel expenses, specifically round-trip travel between Minneapolis and Boston, so Ellison could attend city council meetings every other week from August to the end of the year. In response to Ellison's request, the city clerk acknowledged the prestigious program, but said it's a personal professional development opportunity, and travel for this purpose is not allowed.
It's very disconcerting.
We sat down with 2 very engaged Ward 5 residents.
As a retired math teacher, I can't imagine asking my students to pay for me to commute to and from school. We are his constituents.
I also am glad that the city rejected that request.
Ellison has long maintained he can do both, even from afar. But fellow council members kicked him off most committees. Here's what he told our Eric Shalou in September.
You'll certainly see me at council meetings, barring some kind of emergency, but you'll certainly see me at full council.
But our review of council attendance records shows he's missed 5 of the 11 meetings ever since he's accepted that Harvard fellowship. Now, I was at that city council this morning, that meeting, but was only able to talk to Ellison via text message, where he called this story flimsy, a hit piece, and refused to do an interview unless I could prove that this was somehow in the public's interest. By the way, he appeared to defend that request, saying the travel was related to his urban planning-related education and urban planning-related job. His term ends in January. Live at City Hall, Ryan Raish, 5 Eyewitness News.
Thank you. When you really get to the bottom of this, it may be as simple as this. The criminals in Minnesota are simply doing what they see works. They watch the politicians bend rules, ignore red flags, and look the other way. They saw systems with no real oversight. They saw accountability disappear. And so they got theirs however they could. And now that it's exposed, the same leaders who allowed it to happen want to applaud for cleaning it up. But this didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened because the people in charge created the environment where abuse wasn't punished. It was tolerated. Those are my thoughts, but now I want to hear from you. Drop your comments down below. As always, the best way to show your support is by smashing that thumbs up, subscribing, and sharing this video with more people so they can see what's really going on. Until next time.